Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, so last week I spoke about the 5 khandas, and I thought this big enough topic. I want to continue on with that in terms of the variations between beings and how that is expressed in terms of the khandas, how the khandas play out as defining the individual characteristics of the different sorts of beings in the world. The physical body form is built up of nutriment, of food, and sustained by food. And we see in even on this level of existence on this earth, we see a wide variety of physical forms in the animal kingdom, which is of the different classes of beings. The animal kingdom is classed as the most diverse because there are so many different types of forms, from the very smallest, which the example given in the Pali text as the smallest animal is the mite of a bedbug. But we know there's even smaller microscopic creatures, and largest animals like elephants and land animals and blue whales in the sea, and get very, very large. And mythologically there were sea monsters that were hundreds or even thousands of yojanas long. So there are very many different varieties of physical form, but they all have the characteristic of being made up of the 4 elements and being sustained by nutriment, even though the nutriment is quite varied. There's a long list somewhere of different nutriments, from the coarsest up to the most refined. And it begins with animals like some insects and creatures like that will eat dung, or more refined than that are animals that will eat dead carcasses, and then you have animals that eat nothing but leaves and shoots. Then you have different classes of humans, like the food of an outcast person living off scraps that he begs is less refined than the food of a farmer who grows his own food, which is less refined than that of a nobleman who has imported delicacies. Then the food of the gods, the devas, is more refined than any human food. It's classed as Sudabhojana, pure food. And it's like ambrosia, a word from the Western tradition. Ambrosia, it seems to have been conceived of as some kind of a white milky liquid that they drank in goblets. It's ambrosia. And it's beyond in taste and nutritious essence. It's beyond anything the humans have. And these different classes of food sustain different classes of bodies. And bodies differ in terms of size. They also differ in terms of shape and color and density. Even in the human realm, we have quite a bit of variation in body between size and shape and external appearance. And like the animal kingdom, human bodies are divided into 2 genders. And also like the devas, they're also gendered. So there's all these variations in the physical form. In the lower realms, the bodies of the beings are more how could we say, more changeable, more effervescent in a sense. The beings in the hell realms can be torn apart and burned up and boiled, and they'll heal and to be fresh for the next torture. They can't die until their karma has run out. So there's a less degree of solid physicality, with these, and the ghosts, that realm, generally not visible to humans, though occasionally they do manifest. They're generally invisible to humans, so that the physicality is less solid. And this is also true of the higher realms. And the Devas, their physical forms are much more fluid in terms of being able to change shape. In some of the higher Devas, they can change shape and color and size at will. There's one class of Devas that specialize in the ability to change color, and it's like for play. They'll dance and they'll change it from green to yellow to red to blue to white. It's a kind of a art form or an amusement. And Devas in the realm of delighting in creation are completely fluid in terms of being able to not only change their own shape and form, but to create shapes and forms. So physical matter there is very much more fluid and subject to the mind and the will than it is in the more solid realm below. But then you get up to the Brahma realm, the Rupa Loka. Sometimes you'll see this translated in books into English as the fine material realm. That's a very loose translation, but the reasoning behind it is that the material Kanda, the Rupa Kanda there, is at an entirely new level of subtlety beyond anything below it. Their bodies are of a very subtle nature to ours. So this applies in terms of their nutriment, that they don't take any external nutriment, not even the divine ambrosia. They live entirely on self-generated bliss. They live on jhanic bliss, on piti and sukha. And their form is so subtle that they cannot be seen by beings of the lower realms, even the Devas. When the Brahma comes to see the council of the Devas, this occurs in a couple of suttas, that the Brahma comes to address the council of Devas in Tawatingsa. He first manifests as a brilliant light, and this is all that they can perceive. And Sakka knows, because he's wise, he knows this is a sign that Brahma has come. And then Brahma has to assume a coarse form. He has to take on a grosser form to be able to be visible to the Devas. So he takes the appearance of a Deva, and then he can communicate with them. And it's the same when Devas manifest to humans, which is another step downward in coarseness. They first manifest as a brilliant light, and they can only be perceived in their form if one of two things applies. Either the human is highly advanced spiritually, like the Buddha or one of his disciples, who can, as a divine eye element, well developed, and then they can perceive things from that realm. Or the Deva himself chooses to assume a coarser form to make himself manifest to ordinary humans. So there's different degrees of subtlety of matter conceived in the world. And in the realm of the formless, the Arupa Bhumi, there's no matter at all. this is a complete division from the Brahma gods. That's the realm of form, the Rupa Loka, and this is the realm without form, the Arupa Loka. They're mind only. They're pure mentation without any physical basis. So it's very interesting to contemplate what that means and what that would be like to be a being of that realm. One implication is that you cannot locate them anywhere. It's not correct to say that they're any specific place. It's not correct to say that they're everywhere, because the concept of location is a function of space, which is part of the Rupa Kanda. So they have nothing to do with except the lowest of them is the realm of infinite space. So they still have a tenuous connection to the Rupa Kanda. But the other three levels, there's no connection whatsoever. So there's no way of locating them, because location does not apply. So when you have maps of the cosmos that are laid out, they never include this realm as a location, because they cannot be located. The aggregate or Kanda of feeling, Vedana, is also varied in quality and intensity. The unpleasant feeling, painful feeling, reaches its peak in the lowest realms, in the realm of Avicii Naraya, the nethermost hell, which is conceived of as being 100 yojanas in dimension on all sides, and which is, in terms of the total cosmos, that's quite small. It's very small. And it's jam-packed with beings, because it's also a kind of a general rule that the lower the realm, the more numerous the number of beings in it. So there's this image of the very foundation stone of samsara is this concentrated knot of intense agony. This is under the earth, under the root of Mount Sinnaru, far, far down below the earth, is this concentrated knot of intense pain and suffering. And Avicii means without intermission. So the implication of that is that at this very lowest realm, there's no intermission in the sense of pain. There's no variation. It's always painful. So one conclusion that has been drawn from that is that the beings who are there don't realize that they have a limited span, that they will emerge from that realm. They imagine themselves to be in eternal agony, because if they had the idea in their mind, I'm going to get out of here, that would at least be like one moment of hopeful thought. It would be a pleasant sensation relative to what they're experiencing. So that they don't even have that. But eventually they do get out of there. Various other hells are less total than that one. And all the lower realms in general, the suffering is greater than pleasure. And all the realms higher than human, pleasure is greater than pain. And the pleasure of the devas is beyond anything experienced by humans. And it's said that even to be a world-conquering monarch and rule the 4 continents and have all the luxuries and pleasures of earth is trivial relative to the enjoyment of the lowest of the devas. So their experiencing degrees of pleasure that we can't fully conceive. And here in the human realm, there's also a spectrum of variation. There's many karmic variations within the human realm. And some humans live very miserable lives with a lot of suffering, and some live very enjoyable, pleasant lives with a minimum of suffering. You know? But the general rule is that in the human realm there's a mix of pain and pleasure. So this is what makes it an optimal point for realization of the truth. Because if you're totally immersed in suffering and pain and agony, you're just lost. You have no hope until you get out of that. And if you're stuck in pleasure and bliss and enjoyment, then you don't see any reason to try and get out of it. So it is possible for devas to attain nibbana, but it's exceedingly rare. It's much more optimum place to do it from is from the human realm, and it's impossible in the lower realms. It's said when the Buddha goes up to the Deva realm and teaches that the most common reaction of the Devas is fright and dismay when they hear that they're impermanent. See, they don't want to hear that. No, there's a minority that are wise that will hear the teaching. And in the Brahma realms, the feeling tone in the lower Brahma realms, these correspond to the jhanas. So there's piti and sukha in first and second, and in the second level, the realm of the abhisara beings, piti or rapture is predominant. Then in the realm of higher than that, the third jhana realm, bliss or sukha is predominant, and the visual appearance of the abhisara beings versus the subhakina beings, second and third level, is said to be that the second jhana level Brahmas, their radiance flickers like a torch, but the radiance of the third level Brahmas is steady like that of the moon. So this is the difference between rapture and bliss, between piti and sukha. And in the fourth level, they transcend that altogether, and the feeling tone is equanimity, great peacefulness. And this applies also in the realm of the formless. The aggregate of perception, Kanda of perception, is also extremely variable. For one reason that it is variable is that it is dependent on the incoming senses. It's distinguished from the senses. It's not the same thing, but it uses the input from the senses as raw material. So the information coming in through the senses is quite different for, say, a bee and a bat and a human. These all have quite different sensory apparatus. So the information coming in they have to work with is quite different. And even within the human realm, you have those with keen sight, you have those that have poor eyesight, colorblind, totally blind, those with good hearing, deaf, and everything in between. So there's variations in the incoming information. But then the perception varies between individuals and within an individual from time to time and throughout the course of the life. What you do with that information, this is your perception. And perception is educable. You can train yourself to have a keener perception, and people do have variations in the type of things they perceive more readily. Someone who has studied geology, can look at rocks and see all kinds of, perceive in a much finer way than someone who's never taken any interest in that, who just sees rocks, doesn't perceive differences and nuances. Say someone has an interest in plant life, someone has an interest in music and can perceive nuances in the music. There's many variations in perception. It's sometimes said with the visual artists that the key of making great art is being able to see, which means to perceive, that they're expressing a perception. And the perception varies throughout the realms, and in fact, according to some interpretations, the key difference between all the realms is the quality of perception. There is Dogen's Rivers and Mountains Sutra. It's a very beautiful piece of work, and in one passage in that sutra, he talks about how a river is perceived by human beings as clear flowing water, by hell beings as molten lava, ghosts as a stream of barren ash, and by nagas as crystal palaces, wonderful crystal palaces. There's a story in one of the Pali Jatakas about a wicked scoundrel who tricks the nagas into thinking he's a saint, he's a wise man, and they sometimes, the nagas sometimes, in these stories, they sometimes reward the righteous humans by taking them down to the naga realm and letting them enjoy naga pleasures for a period of time, usually 100 years. So they take this fellow down to their realm, but he's unable to enjoy the naga pleasures. He's living in a naga palace, but he perceives it as a dismal prison. And he's being served by beautiful naga maidens, but he perceives them as ferocious, ugly yakinis, female yakas. And he takes the first opportunity to flee from that place. So he's unable to perceive this palace as a place of pleasure, and it's entirely the faculty of perception. And our own perception is fluid in that way, that we can perceive things as being pleasant or unpleasant, through the faculty of perception. As beautiful, not exactly pleasant and unpleasant, but beautiful or unbeautiful. And it's a highly refined skill to be able, which is said to be one of the qualities of an arahant, is that they're, besides being masters of their mind, they're masters of perception. They can see the lovely in the unlovely and the unlovely in the lovely as they choose. They perceive things as they choose. Yeah. And if you get some, not to take it to the level of an arahant necessarily, but if you can get some handle on that fluidity, this is one way of reducing suffering, is that you find yourself in a place or situation that you find unpleasant, to try and perceive the good in it. Try and perceive the beautiful in the unbeautiful. I think in the Dewa realms, their perception is more fluid as well. And this is one of the qualities of perception, is that it is somewhat bound by the incoming information from the senses. And essentially we dream the world into existence from these signals. The world is there. There's actually an external reality. But we never actually touch it. We only experience it via a limited range of signals that our senses can take in. And then perception creates, essentially dreams into existence, a simulation that we live in that is good enough to be functional. Like we can negotiate and move things around and deal with the world because our simulation is close enough to the ultimate reality that it's functional. And if our senses are distorted, then we hallucinate, we see things wrong, yeah? Which is also perception. And when we're dreaming at night, perception is still functioning, but it's not constrained by the senses, so we just make stuff up. And I think that Dewas, my own take or reading on their existence, is it's somewhere in between. They still have an external reality, but their perception is freer than ours. It's more akin to dreaming. And in the higher Dewa realms, where they can create things with their minds, then it's quite free. And perception of the Brahmas is on a vast scale that's difficult for us to imagine. They can perceive thousands of world systems at a glance. The faculty or Kanda of mental formations, sankharas, is extremely varied amongst beings. This is all the thoughts, emotions, will, attention, concentration, all this mental activity, things constructed by the mind. The factor of Chaitana, will, is that by which we make karma, karmic formations, or volitional formations. And that is less effective. There's less will in the lower realms. The higher animals have a considerable degree of will, but when you get down to levels of like worms and insects, they're much more just automatic in their responses. They have less will, and they're not. And even animals like lions and tigers, that carnivorous animals, they kill things and to live, but they're not really making bad karma by doing that, or at least not to any degree, because they're so driven by instinct and need. It's not so much a question of will. And in the very lowest realms, in the hell realms or the ghost realms, the suffering is intense. The situation is so overwhelming that there's little or no opportunity to exercise any will. So again, little or no karma is made. In the opposite direction, it's similar with the higher realms. There's less karma being made by Dewas or Brahmas than there is by humans, because they're just enjoying their old karma. They're not really doing anything to make new karma. So they have some exercise of will, but they're they don't have the range of karmic action that we do here. This is again where the human being realm in the middle is the primary focus and place where this exercise of will and the making of karma plays out. We also have the mental faculty of Vitakka Vichara, which is applied and sustained thought, which is the foundation of cognitive thought and of speech. We can see the higher animals have some degree of thought and even of speech, if we interpret that broadly as communication, but not to a human level. And if we go up through the higher realms, the devas certainly have vitakka vichara, they have speech and thought. And so do the lowest level of the Brahmas, the first Brahma level. But the second Brahma level is beyond vitakka vichara. It's like second jhana. So the mind is still, the thought formation in the mind is still. So the result of this is that whenever we read stories in the suttas and the commentaries about Brahmas and their interaction with the devas or with humans, or when the Buddha goes up to the Brahma realm and meets with the Brahmas, teaches the Brahmas, this is always first level Brahma realm, because the first level Brahmas, they can think and talk and do stuff, right? But the second, third, and fourth level Brahmas, without vitakka vichara, they're beyond that, they've transcended that. They're just basically blissed out all the time. No, so there's no stories about them, because they're not doing anything, they're just enjoying their happiness. Probably the greatest expression of sankharas, of mental formations, would be in the realm of the beings who delight in creation. The second highest of the deva realms. They create things with their mind. It's essentially their mental formations can manifest as external reality. And lastly, the Kanda of Consciousness, vijnana. This is the Abhidhamma category of citta, is explicitly defined according to the different levels of existence as fourfold, as sense, desire, consciousness, consciousness of form, of the formless, and of nibbana, of the unconditioned. It's also classified in other ways, and if you look in books on Abhidhamma, you'll see all kinds of complicated charts to try and cross-reference these. Consciousness is also either karmic effective or karmic resultant or functional. This is another cross-reference. So we're either making karma, receiving karma, or just acting in a functional way without either making or receiving karma. Then there's all kinds of refinements, so you get altogether 89 different types of consciousness listed in the Abhidhamma. The experience of consciousness among beings varies also according to sense base. This is a simpler classification, but we can see the 6 types of vijnana. There's vijnana through the eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind, which this then feeds into perception. So this is the relationship between body, consciousness, and perception. The body is the organ by which the sense impression arrives, and then consciousness experiences it, and then perception classifies it, names it, knows it in a more refined, particular sort of way. Consciousness can be either dull or bright. One of the types of consciousness is bhavanga consciousness, which is, you'll see it translated as life continuum consciousness, which is sort of, I see where they get that from, but it's sort of a mouthful, and it's not really evocative to on first, unless you have it really explained to you. I think a good way of thinking of what bhavanga means is the mind idling in neutral. When you're in deep sleep, it's continuous, unbroken bhavanga. So you're not dead. Consciousness is still present, but it's at its bare minimum. It's the minimal consciousness. And during the course of waking life, you slide in and out of bhavanga. That's sort of the normal resting mode is bhavanga, and then something impinges on the senses and you go to it. Bhavanga is disturbed and you go out to perceive an object. So when you're trying to develop mindfulness, you're essentially what you're doing is minimizing the amount of bhavanga consciousness. Now, when you're tired and dull and you make mistakes and trip over things and bump into walls, well, that's because you're halfway in bhavanga. You're not perceiving things clearly, sharply. Yeah? And when you're fully aware and bright, you're not sliding in and out of bhavanga. The consciousness in the sense desire realm is dominated by the impressions of the senses. Meaning the physical senses, the 5 physical senses. There's also mind consciousness, but even that is, in the sense desire realm, even that is largely second-hand sense impressions the mind's working over. Purely abstract thought is much less present amongst sense desire realm beings, because the primary way they relate to the world is through the senses. Amongst the Brahma gods, the mind sense is more predominant. They're not as dependent on the senses. The Brahmas only have the 2 senses, physical senses of sight and hearing. They don't have touch, smell, or taste. So they have informational inputs, the eyes and ears. And their power of these senses is greater than ours, but they don't rely on them and they don't seek out pleasure through them. They seek out pleasure through the mind and experiencing of levels of jhanic bliss. The formless realm, there's no physical senses at all. It's entirely mind sense. So they live entirely on mentation. They have no sensory contact with the external world at all. We may speculate, and it's nothing more than speculation, we may speculate that they have some communication amongst themselves, but we don't know, and it's very difficult to even imagine what their experience is like. But they don't have any sensory input from the external world. So in a kind of a summary, the realm of the formless is sometimes called 4 Kanda existence, because there's no physical form, Kanda. And the rest of existence is 5 Kanda existence. Because we have in all other realms of existence, there are variations on these 5 Kanda. This is what makes up existence. And all the beings in samsara are experiencing different physical forms, different perceptions, consciousness, feelings, mental formations, but it's like, different paintings made from a limited palette of colors. You can make infinite variety of forms, but the basic underlying material is limited. This is the nature of existence. And samsara is essentially endless variations on a theme. And all of these khandas in all these different manifestations are impermanent, suffering, imperfect, dependently arisen, and essentially void of self-substance. A good analogy is a kaleidoscope. You have a kid's toy, this kaleidoscope it's like a telescope, and you look in it and turn the wheel, and you see all these pretty mandalas, these different colored patterns. And it's endless, or seems to be endless variation. But if you took one apart and see how it's made, there's some mirrors and a few bits of broken colored glass that shift, and when you turn this, the light reflects off the glass and in the mirrors and makes these patterns. So samsara is basically a kaleidoscope made of the five khandas. That's 5 bits of broken glass in a tube and some mirrors, and it tricks us into experiencing all these wonderful various forms and amazing variations. And we take it all so seriously when it's all just variation of stuff. Yeah? So the trick is to see all the 5 khandas as essentially empty, dependently arisen, impermanent, shifting, void of ultimate meaning, and become liberated from them.